So you're not quite sure how to write for a string orchestra. You have all these violins, the violas, the cellos, and the double basses, but you're not sure what role they all have within the orchestra. Well, here I'll show you 7 different types of voicing I use all the time in my music for strings. And these 7 ways to approach the string orchestra will really help you understand what the role of everybody is and how to start from certain basic guidelines and to expand into a more sophisticated approach of the string orchestra. But we need to start with the basics. And for each one of them, I will present the notes in the score, but I will also give you a little view at the MIDI. And note that it's going to be the same melody and chord progression for every of these 7 examples. So let's dive in. Here's the first type of voicing for a dark and dense texture. So just a quick note, in the score, the double bass is heard an octave lower than how it's written here. So it's actually starting on the same note as the cello here, and it's going down to the C, and then going back up to the F, which is the same note here, and then opposite movement, and then an octave lower here. So we have here the melody starting really low, and so low that the violins cannot play it. It starts in the F, right below the lowest register of the violins, which is the G. So instead of starting this second note on the violins, I decided to make them come in later on the second phrase, on the second part of the phrase, to make it a little bit more intense. Notice I use some divises here because it's so low that if you really want a full sound and all the notes from the chords, you have to divide the cellos and the violas here. And now usually people use the double bass to do exactly the same thing as the cello, but I prefer in some of these cases to have it complemented a little bit, especially in these lower register. So we do have these notes here that are different and that diverge from the cello. So don't hesitate to do this. The double basses are great on their own, especially in these lower types of textures. They don't necessarily always have to be supporting the cellos. And also in DVZs like this one, actually on the viola, this can be played by a single performer with double stops. But I like in these situations to do DVZs, because when you play a double stop, it creates more sound, but it creates a little bit less definition than when one single player is playing one single note on one single string. Now in this second part, since the melody goes up with F, G, A, B flat, I decided to have the violins start together, and when the line goes up here on the D, they separate to end on different notes here. So this is a first easy way to write for low strings. You really have the violins play on their lower strings, and it's a super dark and effective sound. Let's go into the second types of voicing now. Now this one is a little bit bigger, and what I mean by bigger is that the whole orchestra is playing from the beginning to the end, and also you see now that the melody is playing an octave higher than what I had before, and so the notes are not as crowded in the lower register as they are now. We have more space to separate the different notes from the chords, so it creates less harmonic tension in the lowest register. So now the cello and the double basses are very much doing the same line an octave apart. So again, the double bass is heard an octave lower than what it's written here. And I decided to just join the A on the last bar here, because I felt like the low A, like this, would have been too dark. And to have this a little bit more definition, usually you don't want to go too low on the double bass. And sometimes having the same pitch as the cello just helps to reinforce the roots of the chord and creates a little bit less distortion in the harmonics. Now, if you see, my second violin is harmonizing the melody a third below, except for here, but otherwise the viola is filling in the notes from the chords. The A note here wasn't played by anybody, so the viola is doing this. And then we got the C here joined to create octaves with the cello and double bass. And then again, it's the only one playing the C here. And then this movement going from the sixth to the octave is quite nice. Helps to reinforce the melody a little bit here, going down to the A also, and then finishing up on the A here, which is also doing the octave from the cellos. So we have a good amount of space between the lower line. It's usually an octave, which again creates a lot less harmonics than if there was a fifth between the cello and the double bass. If we go back to the first example that was dark and dense, you can see we have also here, there's a third and a sixth. So this is very, very dense and very muddy sound. In most cases, like you don't want to have a whole piece played this way because it's just gonna sound very muddy and we can't really hear. There's less definition on the sounds and the chords. But it's certainly very, very dissonant in a way, dissonant harmonically, in the sense of the harmonic series, not in the sense of the harmonies. So it's a very powerful effect, but you don't want to use it all the time, right? So yeah, that's why the second version here, full and large, is very much breathe a lot more, but still maintains this kind of dark effect with the melody that can be played mostly on the lowest string of the violin. And notice there's no divisi in this one as well, so it's very full in that sense because we have every information from the chords and everybody from each section is playing one note, so it's still it's very powerful. Now to the third one, we have a voicing for something much smaller. Notice that there's no cello, no double bass. I wanted to show you an example of a voicing for string that use mainly the middle register, only a few notes from the chords, and how to make it interesting as well. So I decided to start only with the violins on the D. The melody starts going up, and we add more and more notes from the chords. But just to finish on a A, C, E, and I, C here for maybe a quieter or a softer section of a piece. But yes, we start in unison. There's a nice little tension here when the first violin goes on to the E. There's a second here as this one is staying, and then we have a third here as this one goes up. There's a divisi here, so this note, the F, is taken by the second violin. So notice the divisi was not done on the first violin because we want to keep most of our players here on the main melody. And then I add in the root note here from the G minor chord on the violas, then resolving this way. But notice we're still in the lowest register from the higher strings, so it's still not such an intense and bright effect. It's still quite dark, but a little bit more subtle than the previous example. Now into the next one. We have a little bit of the same version here, but I wanted to show how you can add a little support by not having the double bass, but to using the cellos as really the bass note in this case. So the cellos are quite low, if you can see. So they start from a fifth here, going to an octave here, and then to a tenth. So there's quite a distance here between the violas and the cellos. Then going back to the fifth, and then ending on a 12th, which is an octave plus a fifth. So it's okay to have a lot of distance between your lowest line and your upper lines. The problem is when you have an upper line, which is like this, a 12 apart of the lower voices. Then it creates a gap that is very noticeable. To have just the low bass line alone is fine. It's just an harmonic series thing. It's okay to leave it under. Since it's such a rich harmonic sound, then it's not quite a problem and it's not quite noticeable because you kind of hear within the note the higher octave. And since it's the root note, it's very noticeable, then it's okay to do it like this. So the upper three lines are quite close to each other. So the lowest line here actually just gives a lot of support to this chord progression and to the melody. And again, we don't have any DVZ here. Everybody's playing their own line. It's kind of a string quartet in that case, but expanded to the string orchestra. And now into the fifth version. We have a version here that is light, and we add some light into the sound because we go and get the higher octave here of the melody. And the last few examples are going to be around here. Here it's quite light because we, again, don't have the double basses. You shouldn't use the double basses all the time because they're very much used only for a certain register, and sometimes you don't need that register in your sound. So a little bit like we've done in the small example here, that was the third one. We added in the violas into the two last bars, and here we add the cello actually only for the two last chords, which reinforce the kind of cadence, the plagal cadence we have here. So we have the violins starting third apart, going up. We have the violas, we're adding the C here, and then going down to the F. So we have quite a distance here. Here we have a fifth, then here we have a sixth. So that's a light version of the voicing that you can use in this higher register to have the notes spread out. Don't spread them out too much. Don't spread them more than an octave, let's say. Having a sixth, having a fifth, having a third is very fine. It gives some space to the different lines. You can hear them individually, but still it keeps a certain cohesion between them. So I decided to bridge this little gap only on this last chord here. We have the A, the D, the A again, the F, and the low D here. So we do have closer notes together at the end like this, but then they spread out onto the A, E, A. So that's a fifth plus a fourth, and then we have the third of the chord. And it's interesting because actually we have two fifths, a fifth here and then a second one here, and then the I, C, which is the only third from the chord. So a good light version that you can do, but still very full and gives you all the information, all the harmonic information of your chords. Now, the last two versions are probably the most interesting. We have combinations of all the different examples we've had. So first, we have an emphasis on the melody, which is almost the version that we had earlier with the melody here that was given to the first violins. But then now we have it also an octave above. So that's super interesting because there's nothing between these two. There's no note that fills the gap between them. It's really an octave going up. And this is a good way to do emphasis on the melody. Because earlier I said don't give too much space between the higher notes. Well, in this case, it's okay because the higher note here is not considered to be part of the chord texture. It's really emphasizing the harmonics from this second violin here. So it's like the real voicing of the string section stops at the second violin. But we just add in a little effect over it to give it more light and more power with the first violin. So that's the way to see this. Now I decided to divide the cellos. So half of the cellos are following the double basses, actually an octave higher, and then the other cellos are filling some of the notes from the chords. So here I really wanted to have something fuller in the middle register to feel all the colors from the chords and to give a lot of space for the higher melody to shine. And now onto the last example. This is a little bit the same as what I showed you right before. The only difference is that now there are some extra colors between the octaves here. There's the higher octave here and then the lower octave here, and that's the melody. And actually, the first violin is playing some of these notes as well. So a lot of emphasis on the melody here, but we have these notes in between that fills some of the notes from the chords. So instead of having them down here, these extra notes to give information about the chords, they're intertwined between the notes from the melody. This can help the lower register to breathe a lot more. We can really feel like a strong bass because also the cellos are not divided and they're really playing exactly the same as the double bass. And the melody now is much more blurred. It feels like the melody is just one big chord moving and changing harmonically. And now I usually do this. I give the higher melody to the first violin, and then I divine the second violin, which is playing also the higher melody from the first violin, but also a series of notes that add some information in the middle register. And then you have the violas, which are also divided, which add the lowest one is actually doing the octave from the higher note from the violin, and the note here is giving the last note from the chord, which was missing in between the second violins and the violas. So these are just basic types of voicing you can use. There's, of course, a lot more to it than just this. You can use the cellos to be playing above the violas and the violins sometime to create a very expressive melodic line and very tense and colorful. Or you can have the viola doing a melody in its lowest register while having the accompanying harmony played by the higher violins, but just softer. These are all interesting possibilities to voice your string orchestra. But I like to start with these basic ground rules of lightness, darkness, depth, density, space, to just understand how to create the different sounds that I want in my string orchestra. If you want to see more about how I arrange for strings, I suggest you watch this next video.